In the context of looking at the 100-year celebration of law school, of course, we want to talk about the clinic and the anniversary coming up for the clinic. So can you talk a little bit about the clinic when it first started, and then I'm going to take you down memory lane for when you got here and blew everything up.
Okay, so you mean the clinic before I got here. Sure, I can tell you what I know about the history. And the clinic began in the early 1990s in a little building off campus. My understanding is that it used to be converted apartment building or a converted hotel over toward 244. Nothing luxurious, a pretty standard low rent legal services office. And our colleague, Winona Tanaka, was the founding director of a legal clinic. And those students provided services in a variety of different kinds of civil legal matters for the first few years that the clinic was open until the building opened on campus.
And the building is called?
And the building is called the Boucher Legal Clinic.
That's the building, not the program.
That's the building, not the program. The dean at the time was Dean Marty Belsky, and he was very committed to clinical education at the College of Law.
And what year did you arrive?
I arrived at TU in 2005.
And what was your plan?
I came to TU with the plan to start the immigration clinic. I taught in the Older Americans Clinic for my first year, demonstrating what we all want all of our students to know, which is any lawyer can practice any kind of law if they put their nose to the grindstone and figure out what the law is that they're trying to practice. Because I had never practiced, never done estate planning, never done any of that. And all of a sudden I was teaching a clinic where my students were doing that.
But that's a principle at the heart of clinical legal education too, right? Is you don't have to be interested in the topic. You will learn lawyering skills that are transferable.
Exactly. And the key piece of that for clinical education is that somebody will walk into your office any day of the week in legal practice and will present some novel issue to you that you've never done before. And if you want to take the case, you're going to have to educate yourself.
And what was the political environment at that point in the state of Oklahoma?
Okay. So I should first say that even colleagues on the faculty kind of raised an eyebrow when I said I was going to start an immigration clinic and said, think you're going to have any clients? And I said, yeah, I'm pretty sure I'll have some clients. And in fact, right here in our neighborhood in Kendall Whittier, where the law school is, where the university is one of the first destinations for non-citizens, and certainly was at that time for non-citizen residents coming to Tulsa, landing in residential communities in and around Kendall Whittier. So not only would there be clients in Tulsa, there would be clients in our own backyard. From the time I got here until early 2007, the legislature was doing everything possible to send a message that immigrants were not welcome in Oklahoma. And a bill was passed and reluctantly signed by the governor called HB 1804, the Oklahoma Citizen and Taxpayer Protection Act. And at the time, it was the strictest anti-immigration bill in the country. Stricter even than what the whole world came to know about with Arizona's SB 1070 a couple of years later. So we lived in a community where the message that was coming from our state representatives was immigrants living here were our enemies, that we didn't want them here, and that we would do everything possible to try to drive them from our community. And that's what happened when the bill went into effect. A lot of non-citizens living in the community, those who were undocumented, as well as those who had legal status, found Oklahoma and Tulsa to be very inhospitable as a place to live, to work, to send their children to school. So a lot of the work that we did in the clinic was to provide education to these families, about what their rights were, to help them understand what the law meant for them, and to represent them in the event that they came in contact with immigration enforcement. There was some criticism of the work that we were doing in the clinic from members of our community. And fortunately, the law school and the university have consistently been supportive of the work that we've done in the clinic.
You wrote an article about HB 1804, right? And that was a published article. And what was your perspective in that article?
My perspective was that these laws, this law in Oklahoma and this law, similar laws across the country, were essentially political stunts in an attempt for Republican candidates to win votes on an anti-immigrant ticket, with no hope really of having any real impact on immigration regulation, and actually with the stated hope of scaring the bejesus out of the immigrant community and getting them to self-deport, right? What had happened was essentially a state-by-state grassroots movement to try to force Congress to take restrictive action with respect to immigration. And when those efforts had failed in Congress, anti-immigrant groups went state by state, trying to get state legislatures to pass these laws, one state at a time, with the hopes of achieving on a local level what they couldn't achieve on a national level.
Was that successful in Oklahoma?
It was successful in the sense that the law was passed. It was not successful in the sense that it actually achieved anything. In the initial months after the law went into effect, there were stories of immigrant families keeping their kids home from school because they were afraid of raids. There were stories of people leaving their jobs. There were stories of families leaving Tulsa and families leaving Oklahoma. But at the end of the day, there are very few instances of any of the laws that were part of HB 1804 ever actually being enforced. So it was really a lot of bluster and not a lot of enforcement.
Okay, so you did some really unique things that people around the country, as humble as you are, took note of. So one, despite the fact of being in a very conservative state, you started to do the types of immigration work that require assistance from law enforcement. And how did you, where law enforcement actually has to give the immigrant a document so that they can get the visa. So in many states around the country, many cities, many municipalities, police officers won't sign these law enforcement certificates. So what did you do in Tulsa?
So I think really it gets down to the principle that we try and teach our students in the clinic across the board. Maybe we try and teach it to our children too, which is if at first you don't succeed. So we learned to be very adaptive and creative in our advocacy. We learned that if we couldn't get assistance through the district attorney's office, we could go to the Tulsa Police Department. If we couldn't get assistance through the Tulsa Police Department, as a last resort, we could go to the Tulsa County Sheriff's Office. Or maybe even other law enforcement agencies who had the authority to certify that our clients had assisted law enforcement. That was one avenue of attack that we took. We also spent a lot of time, not just myself, but the students out in the community, educating people about what these programs were meant to do. So sitting down with members of the Tulsa Police Department and the Tulsa County Sheriff's Office and explaining to them that these programs put in place by Congress are meant to support law enforcement, right? Sadly, sometimes the best way to convince people that a law they don't like is one they should support is to point out how much they will actually benefit from it, and to not focus so much on the benefits to people they don't want to help. So giving immigration benefits to non-citizen victims of violent crimes who come forward and work with law enforcement in the investigation and prosecution of crimes helps law enforcement, helps keep neighborhoods safe. And in particular, when those victims are undocumented crime victims who might otherwise be afraid of coming in contact with immigration enforcement, the support that law enforcement get from that type of legislation is really meaningful. And by and large, we found that even the most conservative law enforcement agencies in our region were receptive to that argument.
By the time I got here in 2014, because you're being really humble right now, you had a system in place with TPD, and specifically with one officer who credits you for training her. Can you talk a little bit about Stephanie?
Yes. I won't take all the credit for where she has ended up in her life, but we did have, we developed a relationship with a member of the Tulsa Police Department, a sergeant in the Tulsa Police Department by the name of Stephanie Jackson. And Stephanie was a career Tulsa police officer who worked in the Violent Crimes and Domestic Violence Unit. And so we developed a relationship with her where we, and when I say we, it's really a little I and a big they of the students, because they're the ones who did the work. Worked with her to educate her about this program and the qualifications for the program and the circumstances under which our clients would qualify. And over time, she became a very strong advocate for this program, and she became a huge fan of the TU Legal Clinic, to the point that she stepped down from her position in the Tulsa Police Department short of her required time for retirement, which was just a few years off, and came to TU Law School full-time, as a full-time student, and became a student in the legal clinic. And now she has graduated. She is, she's one of our most enthusiastic alumni supporters at the College of Law, and she has a thriving estate planning practice where she has mentored many more law students, including some of our clinic students.
And some of us cried when she left.
Yes,
TPD.
we did. We did. We were sad to have her. We were sad to have that relationship end, but we knew that it was overall a good idea.
And she stayed on a few years, even in law school, hitting them over the head with what they should do. Okay, so the other really unique thing that you did that was incredibly innovative at the time, that we later discovered was the second of its kind in the entire country, was to start a little program called Turn. So can you talk about what your motives were, how that came about? And
yes. So just to backtrack a little bit, when I first came to Tulsa, with the exception of the clinic that I started, all of the other clinics at TU were sponsored by outside organizations. The Department of Education, the Muskogee Creek Nation. We had outside donors who were supporting the work of the clinic, and we had faculty members and staff attorneys staffing these clinics year-round to provide services to the communities that they served. Why did we do that? We did that because people's legal problems don't just operate according to academic semesters, right? So when I started the immigration clinic, we didn't have outside funding. The funding for the clinic was essentially the funding to support my salary. And over time, we realized we needed to do two things. One is that we needed to provide wraparound year-round service to the community, but we also knew that we needed to provide something in addition to direct representation to fill the huge need in the community for immigrant legal services. So early on in my time at TU, I think it was in 2007, I and former Dean Robert Butkin wrote a grant to the George Kaiser Family Foundation to support a program that would partner with the Immigrant Rights Project that I taught to have a staff attorney and a legal fellow who would join me in that work and who would take on these additional components of direct representation and community education so that we could offer our services on a year-round basis. And so that our clients, if they had problems or questions or issues or filings that happened over summer break or between Christmas and New Year's, that there was somebody there to answer the phone and to help them. And this allowed us to both provide comprehensive service to our clients and also to do something that is really critical in clinical education, which is to not burden students with a caseload that is so heavy that they cannot take the time necessary to do thoughtful, reflective work while they're enrolled in the clinic.
So, can you think of your time here, one client in particular that stands out, and the impact that our immigration programs had on that client and or his or her family?
There are so many who come to mind. But I will just mention one who you and I have spoken about recently, who has been a client of mine probably for more than a decade, who was a young man, at the time a young man, much younger than me, from Afghanistan. And he worked with allied forces, including the United States government, in Afghanistan during United States involvement in the early days in Afghanistan. And he was a translator. He was also a member of he was an officer in the Afghani military. And he was targeted by the Taliban for his work with U.S. forces, to the point that he was threatened, his family was threatened, his father was kidnapped. He believed that he needed to leave Afghanistan in order for his family to be safe. So with the assistance of a friend of his from the U.S. military, he came to the U.S. for some training, and while he was here, decided to apply for asylum and contacted the clinic, and we represented him in that case. And he has been my client for almost as long as I have been at the clinic. Certainly he is a client who I have remained in touch with in a representational capacity for the longest. And that has to do with both him applying for asylum and then for a green card and then for citizenship, but also for his efforts, which we assisted him with, to return back to Afghanistan after he had asylum. He's the oldest child and the oldest son of his parents, who were elderly. He felt terrible about abandoning them, what he viewed as abandoning them. So several times he wanted to travel home to Afghanistan. We advised him how dangerous this was and how he might possibly be putting his immigration status at risk by doing so. But we also understood why he wanted to do it, so we worked with him to get the necessary documentation that he could get and to advocate for him on behalf of the U.S. or to the United States government so that they wouldn't revoke his asylum status. We did that a couple of times. We worked with him on his application for U.S. citizenship. He'd moved to Louisiana at that point. We collaborated with another clinic at Loyola New Orleans to help with that process. And most recently, the clinic has assisted him in trying to bring his family out of Afghanistan after the fall of Afghanistan to Taliban, after the departure of the United States from Afghanistan last year. And in some ways, the story is a victory. Mm-hmm. In many important ways, the story is a victory. Mm-hmm. Except there are a lot of ways in which it hasn't been a victory, right? And it shows what we're able to accomplish on an individual basis to help people and keep them safe. Mm-hmm. But it also shows the limits of what we can do when international political forces are at play, right? And that's a really important lesson, which I know you've been involved in having your students learn in recent interactions with this client, that there's only so much we can do. Does that mean we don't try? Does that mean we don't fight? No, it doesn't. We don't give up because there's always a chance. And it's also really important for the communities that we serve to know that they have advocates who stand with them and are willing to fight with them, even if it's a steep uphill climb and it may take a really long time to reach the mountaintop, right? So we've got some more work to do with respect to that. And you and I both know that. So I think all of that is really kind of quintessential to what we're doing in the clinic, right? That it is, so much of this work is about standing with our clients in the challenges that they face and teaching our students how to do that, right? How not to be cowed by the odds, right? Because we face a lot of bad odds in the work that we do in immigration, that there are things that we can achieve for our clients, even if it isn't really victory in the end.
It's a different way to succeed. Okay, well, we greatly appreciate the story. And we have one more thing we want to talk to you about.
Professor McCormick was just an outstanding testament, sharing with us just a bit of the work that you've done. It's just outstanding. What you've meant to your students, what you've meant to your colleagues, what you've meant to this university is difficult to put in words. It is a legacy that we respect and admire, and that we all aspire to in our own work day to day. Hearing you comment about service and providing an example for our students, it's just inspiring. The University of Tulsa has for some time celebrated the works of our faculty and other members of our community through the King's Crowd Projects, which is a tremendous opportunity for the university to recognize outstanding work and to provide it a platform for all of us to admire and to appreciate its contributions. In that regard, it is my honor to share with you that we will be establishing the Elizabeth M. McCormick Immigration Justice and Advocacy Fund. The purpose of this fund is to provide the resources so that the tremendous work that you've done, that work will continue, and that resources will be provided for other scholars, other academics, other faculty, other clinical faculty, students, staff attorneys, for these people to continue the work that you have so diligently put your hand to, and the work that you have done in the interest of certainly educating our students, but also helping those who are often less fortunate, those who really do battle against the odds, and to show our students that it's about zealously representing our clients. It's about understanding the importance of that work. And so it's my honor to let you know that we will establish the Elizabeth M. McCormick Immigration Justice and Advocacy Fund, and that we will continue to try to live up to the tremendous example you provided for us. And I just want you to say it is my honor as the dean of this law school to be a part of this. Thank you so much.
The legacy you left is almost it's hard to quantify it. And we take those lessons to heart.